usually, when you think about a car crash, there's this underlying assumption that it is exactly that, an accident.
Right, because the very word accident implies a total lack of design.
Exactly. Two vehicles somehow occupying the exact same space at the exact same time. Like through a terrible mix of bad weather or maybe a distracted driver or just incredibly bad luck.
Yeah, it's chaotic, it's sudden, and fundamentally it's unintentional. When you see crumpled metal on the side of the highway, you just naturally view that wreckage as the messy aftermath of a random event.
Right, but when you start pulling the actual transcripts from a massive federal trial in New Orleans, which we did for this deep dive, and you start reading the Department of Justice press releases and looking through local news coverage from WDSU and FOX8, well, that assumption shatters completely.
It really does. The sources we're diving into today reveal a scenario where the chaos on the highway wasn't random at all.
No, not at all. It was highly choreographed.
It was a sophisticated, multi-million-dollar business model, basically disguised as bad luck. And the wild part is, it went on for over a decade.
A decade.
Yeah, from late 2011 all the way until the convictions finally came down on Friday, March 20th, 2026.
So today's mission is to unpack the jaw-dropping conclusion to what the federal government dubbed Operation Sideswipe. A federal jury in New Orleans convicted two prominent personal injury attorneys, Vanessa Mata and Jason Giles.
But, to understand how two wealthy lawyers ended up facing federal prison, you really have to understand the pure mechanical ingenuity of the scam they were running. Because, this wasn't just inflating a chiropractor bill after a fender bender.
Oh, far from it.
The sheer level of coordination required to pull this off on the actual streets is just staggering. The sources outline this highly structured, almost corporate hierarchy operating right on the asphalt.
Yeah, they had three very specific roles, right?
Exactly. First, you had the recruiters. These were individuals like Diamond Nike Stalbert, whose job was essentially human resources. They were finding people willing to pack into a car and just pretend to be injured.
Wow.
Then you had the spotters, who drove a separate getaway or surveillance vehicle. And at the center of it all, you had the slammers.
The Slimers. Just the name itself.
Right.
These were individuals like Ryan Harris and Cornelius Garrison. And their specific job description was to intentionally crash a moving vehicle into a commercial 18-wheeler on the interstate.
Intentional.
Yes. And the method they used is where you really start to see the dark brilliance of the whole scheme. They specifically targeted the I-10 corridor in New Orleans, and they always, literally always use salvage-titled vehicles.
Which is such a crucial mechanical detail because think about it. If you are staging an accident, your absolute biggest enemy is an insurance company's accident reconstruction expert.
Right, the person who comes out to figure out what happened.
Yeah, exactly. A good expert can look at a fresh dent and determine the angle of impact, the speed of the vehicles, all of that. But a salvage title car, it already has pre-existing damage.
Oh, wow. So it's already a mess.
Yeah, it's already scraped, dented, completely compromised. So when you intentionally sideswipe a truck with a car that is already beat up, you effectively blind the reconstruction expert.
Because they can't tell the new damage from the old damage.
Precisely. They can't definitively prove which dent came from the semi-truck and which dent was already there from 3 years ago.
That creates instant plausible deniability. And the reason they targeted 18-wheelers specifically is because of the financial golden ticket here. A standard passenger car might only carry, $15,000 or $30,000 in liability coverage?
Something like that, yeah.
But commercial trucking companies are mandated by federal law to carry a minimum of a $1 million liability policy.
Which makes them the highest yield target on the road. And because of and that production analogy actually maps perfectly onto how the money flowed too. Because just like a film studio financing a movie, the capital had to move from the top down without looking like a criminal enterprise.
Right, because you can't exactly write a check to a slammer and put bribe for crashing car on I-10 in the memo line.
Yeah, that would be a bad idea. The fraud had to be laundered through legitimate legal mechanisms. According to court records, the street-level participants were paid by Vanessa Mata and her fiancé, a disbarred attorney named Sean Alfordish. But the payments weren't called bribes, they were structured as litigation advances.
which in the normal personal injury world is a legitimate thing. Like if
Sure.
you are genuinely injured and out of work, a law firm might advance you some money to help you make rent while you wait for your settlement.
Precisely. It's a very well-known industry practice. So when an auditor or a federal investigator looks at the books, they just see a law firm giving a struggling client an advance on their future payout. It is practically invisible. They weaponize standard legal practices to distribute payroll to a criminal syndicate.
That is wild. But, the production doesn't stop when the police report is filed. The escalation on the medical side is where this crosses a genuinely terrifying ethical line.
Oh, absolutely.
We aren't just talking about passengers wearing neck braces and complaining of a little whiplash to get a kick 10 grand. To hit that $1 million commercial policy limit, you have to prove catastrophic damages.
Because the entire civil justice system relies on this multiplier effect. Insurance adjusters calculate pain and suffering based on the severity and the cost of the medical treatment.
Right.
A soft tissue injury treated with physical therapy might only yield a small settlement. But the moment a scalpel touches human skin, the perceived value of that case just skyrockets.
So the passengers in these stage crashes were directed to specific doctors and aggressively encouraged to undergo medically unnecessary spinal surgeries.
It's hard to even fathom.
Right. Neck surgeries, back surgeries. They were allowing themselves to be cut open, having their spines permanently altered, just to artificially inflate the medical invoices so the lawyers could demand the maximum payout from the trucking companies.
And when you grasp the mechanics of how that money is generated, it naturally leads to the central conflict of the federal trial. The government had to prove that the attorneys sitting in those nice offices actually knew the origins of these crashes.
Because in the legal profession, a fraudulent client does not automatically equal a fraudulent lawyer.
Exactly.
So let's dig into that defense, because knowing how these crashes worked on the street makes the courtroom battle fascinating. Vanessa Mata's lawyer, Sean Toomey, utilized what you could basically call the naive pawn defense.
Yeah, the I had no idea approach.
Right. He argued that Mata was relatively inexperienced, that she was misled and manipulated by her older fiancé, Sean Fordish. He said she foolishly held on to what she thought were green flags in these cases. He essentially painted her as this trusting partner who just thought she was receiving a steady stream of legitimate, high-value case referrals.
And then you had Linda Van Davis, representing Jason Giles, who took a more structural approach.
How so?
Well, her defense rested on the inherent nature of a lawyer's job. She argued that an attorney is an advocate, not a private investigator. When clients walk into an office, sit across the desk, and present a real police report showing they were hit by a truck, the attorney has to evaluate the case presented.
So she was saying he couldn't know they were lying.
Right. She argued Giles couldn't control if people came into his firm and lied to his face. Her stance was effectively, you cannot criminalize an attorney just because they were hired by liars.
I mean, I have to push back hard on that narrative, though.
Please do.
Because if you are a seasoned trial lawyer and you are receiving dozens upon dozens of identical cases, I mean, think about the parameters here. It is the exact same type of crash. A sideswipe on the I-10 corridor.
Yep.
It is always a salvage title car. It is always packed with 3 or 4 passengers. They all complain of the exact same symptoms, and they're all funneled to the exact same clinics for the exact same invasive spinal surgeries. At what point does a lawyer's claim of, I didn't know, stop being a legitimate legal defense and just cross over into willful, deliberate blindness?
Well, prosecutor Ryan McLaren built the government's entire counterattack around that exact logic. He argued this had absolutely nothing to do with naivety or being fooled by clever clients. He presented it as a case of pure, calculated greed.
And he had the receipts to back it up.
Oh, did he ever? The way the prosecution dismantled the plausible deniability wasn't just through theory. It was through a massive, undeniable mountain of digital data.
We're talking about cell tower location data, financial ledgers, and a staggering volume of text messages. The texts between Jason Giles and a street-level runner named Damien LeBeau were particularly damning.
LeBeau actually testified that he was making thousands of dollars a week from Giles, specifically to organize these crashes.
And the timing of those text messages is what destroyed the defense. McLaren didn't just show that Giles and LeBeau knew each other. He showed the jury that they were communicating incessantly right around the exact moments these crashes were occurring.
I love the moment McLaren had during closing arguments. It was brilliant. He pointed to the communication logs and asked the jury, What do you think they were talking about the saints? The weather?
Right, like you can't claim you were just evaluating a case after the fact when your cell phone records show you are texting the organizer while the cars are literally still on the highway.
Exactly. And they didn't just have digital data. They had the ultimate insider. The Fed secured the testimony of another former attorney, Danny Keating.
Keating is a critical piece of this puzzle. He had already taken a plea deal after admitting to personally handling 77 fraudulent cases within this exact scheme.
77 cases.
Yeah, collecting over $1 million in illicit payouts. When you have a peer, another attorney, sitting on the stand detailing the inner workings of the conspiracy, explaining the coded language they used, the cash payouts wrapped in newspapers, the idea that Mata and Giles were just innocent dupes completely evaporates.
It pierces the attorney-client privilege veil, because that privilege does not apply if the attorney is an active co-conspirator in an ongoing crime.
The government proved they weren't just reacting to these crashes. They were the crucial financial engine making the entire machinery run. Which leads to the absolute darkest chapter of this deep dive.
Yeah, things take a very dark turn here.
Because the desperate need to maintain that plausible deniability to make sure the feds could never connect the slammers on the street to the law firms, it pushed them across the line from white-collar fraud into a deadly cover-up.
When a sophisticated criminal enterprise is suddenly threatened with decades in federal prison, the participants often resort to extreme measures. And the transition from staging accidents to obstructing a federal grand jury investigation happened rapidly.
The jury convicted Mata and Giles on serious obstruction and witness tampering charges. Giles and the King firm were found guilty of secretly recording a witness who was cooperating with the federal investigation, trying to manufacture exculpatory evidence to save themselves.
And meanwhile, Mata and her firm were convicted of trying to literally finance a witness's escape. They tried to pay a witness to flee the jurisdiction and move to the Bahamas just to keep them away from federal subpoenas.
But the obstruction went far beyond secret recordings and international flights. It escalated to a contract killing.
It did. In 2020, as the federal net was tightening, Cornelius Garrison, who is one of the primary slammers who orchestrated dozens of these crashes, he decided to cooperate. He was secretly working with federal investigators, providing the exact details they needed to tie the straights to the suites.
And according to the trial records, when Mata's fiancé, Sean Alfordish, discovered Garrison was cooperating, the reaction was just ruthless.
Ugh.
He allegedly labeled Garrison a rat and a smidge.
And then, leveraging the exact same street network they used for the fraud, Alfordish allegedly enlisted another slammer, Ryan Harris, to hire a hitman.
A man named Leon Chunky Parker.
Yeah. And in September 2020, Parker executed Cornelius Garrison.
It forces you to completely reevaluate the label of white-collar crime, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We tend to categorize insurance fraud as a sterile, paper-based offense. But the mechanics of protecting a multi-million-dollar fraud network are often indistinguishable from the brutal tactics of a drug cartel.
That underlying tension, that realization of the violence required to maintain the lie, it completely boiled over during the courtroom climax on March 20th. When Judge Wendy Vitter began reading the guilty verdicts for Mata and Giles across all charges, the courtroom essentially broke down.
It was pure chaos.
Mata's mother, who was sitting in the gallery, actually fainted.
Just collapse.
Mata started screaming, "Mommy, Mommy," until medical personnel had to be rushed in. After her mother was finally revived, Mata turned around and began dry heaving and vomiting right there in the federal courtroom.
It is a profound physical manifestation of a reality crashing down. But, the dramatic scene did not sway the court's perspective at all.
Not even a little.
The defense immediately begged for home confinement pending sentencing, arguing that Mata was not a flight risk and pointing to the emotional family situation unfolding right there in the room. Judge Vitter, however, was unwavering.
Judge Vitter's statement from the bench is one of the most chilling assessments you'll ever hear a judge deliver to officers of the court. She rejected the bond request outright. She looked at Mata and stated plainly, "I have no reason whatsoever to believe she is naive."
But it is the justification she gave next that really contextualizes the severity of the ruling. Judge Vitter stated that she made a specific determination during the trial that Vanessa Mata had acquiesced in the death of a witness, directly referencing the murder of Cornelius Garrison.
Just process that phrase, acquiesced in the death of a witness. Hearing a federal judge level that assessment against a practicing attorney is staggering.
It completely explains why she remanded both attorneys into federal custody immediately. Now, it's important to clarify that Mata and Giles were convicted of fraud, obstruction, and witness tampering in this trial. The actual murder trial for Chanel Fordish and Leon Parker is scheduled separately for August.
Right.
But Judge Vitter's commentary makes it abundantly clear that the court views the attorneys as fully aware of and complicit in the lethal lengths the conspiracy went to in order to protect its cash flow.
So when you pull all these threads together, it is very easy to look at the disgraced lawyers, the murdered witness, and the dramatic courtroom breakdown and view this as just an isolated true crime thriller, like a wild story localized to New Orleans.
Fair.
But the climax of Operation Sideswipe reveals a much wider web of collateral damage, and this is exactly where the story reaches out of the courtroom and directly impacts you, the person listening to this right now.
Yes. U.S. Attorney Michael Simpson made this point emphatically on the courthouse steps. He stated clearly that insurance fraud is never a victimless crime.
Never. Look at it from the perspective of the commercial truck drivers. You have men and women simply trying to earn a living moving freight along the I-10 corridor. Through absolutely no fault of their own, their 80,000-pound vehicles are intentionally targeted as props in a criminal production.
It's infuriating.
Because of these staged crashes, innocent drivers were fired from their jobs, they had their commercial driver's licenses revoked, their entire livelihoods were dismantled because an accident reconstructionist couldn't prove the crash was faked. Also, a syndicate of lawyers and street-level slammers could max out a commercial liability policy.
And the economic footprint is just massive. Operation Sideswipe alone involved 63 charged defendants and has resulted in over 50 convictions so far.
Wow.
When you have a single enterprise successfully staging upwards of 150 to 200 commercial tractor-trailer crashes, the insurance payouts drain millions and millions of dollars from the system.
Think about the insurance pool, like a municipal water supply. If an organized group illegally taps into the main city water line to fill a massive private reservoir, the city doesn't just absorb the cost of the missing water. They raise the water rates for every single home in the neighborhood to cover the loss.
Exactly.
That is exactly what happens with systemic insurance fraud. The massive settlements paid out to these fake victims are recouped by the insurance companies through higher premiums. That is why Louisiana has some of the highest auto insurance rates in the country, and why everyday drivers see their monthly premiums mysteriously spike even when they haven't had an accident. You are quietly subsidizing their fraud every time your policy renews.
Which brings up a glaring, unresolved question that the legal commentary in our sources highlights. We have thoroughly mapped out the lawyers who funded it, the slammers who drove the cars, the spotters, and the recruiters. But there is a massive missing piece of the puzzle.
The doctors.
Exactly. The medical providers. The entire multi-million-dollar scheme is fundamentally dependent on medical professionals willing to perform unnecessary spinal surgeries.
You cannot mathematically reach a $1 million insurance payout without a surgeon holding a scalpel, making the incisions, and signing off on the catastrophic medical charts.
You just can't. Yet, as the legal analysis points out, there has been a noticeable lack of consequences for the medical treaters who served as the linchpin for the entire enterprise.
It is the ultimate bottleneck of the scam. You cannot have staged medical billing without staged medical treatment. Will we see a future wave of indictments targeting the surgeons who cut into healthy spines?
It's a great question. Proving medical fraud is incredibly complex because a doctor can always hide behind the defense of aggressive treatment protocols or just relying on the patient's subjective complaints of pain.
Right. My patient said their back hurt.
Exactly. But it remains a massive unresolved thread in the DOJ's investigation. It demonstrates how deeply entrenched these fraud networks become. They don't just operate on the fringes, they integrate themselves directly into legitimate legal, medical, and financial systems, making them incredibly difficult and time-consuming to untangle.
We've tracked an unbelievable escalation today. What began as a string of seemingly minor routine fender benders on the interstate unraveled into a federal RICO-style takedown. It exposed an underworld where human spines were treated as literal ATM machines, escalated into the execution of a federal witness, and finally ended with the dramatic downfall of two prominent attorneys who thought they could outsmart the system.
It really is a stark reminder for you as a listener. The next time you see one of those massive personal injury billboards looming over the highway, or the next time you open your auto insurance renewal and wonder why the rates went up again, just keep in mind the hidden ecosystem of slammers, spotters, and corrupt professionals that might be operating entirely out of sight.
Which leaves you with one final thought to mull over. Operation Sideswipe took well over a decade to operate, and it required the combined, relentless force of the FBI, the Department of Justice, and local law enforcement over multiple years to finally unravel.
It took an army.
But look at where technology is heading. With the rapid rise of mandatory dash cams in commercial fleets and AI-driven telematics that track every micro-movement of a truck, will the staged sideswipe finally be rendered obsolete? Or, given the millions of dollars at stake, will these crime rings simply evolve their scripts, finding a new high-tech blind spot in the system to exploit? We assume the jagged line on the X-ray was an accident. The terrifying part is wondering how many other jagged lines are being drawn on purpose right now, completely undetected.